Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Philippa, Nicoll, Antipas aho, and I'm the Postgraduate Program Director of the Mind Lab by Unitec in Wellington. And this is a video on growth mindset, which is being made to support your learning around leadership in digital and collaborative learning. So Carol Dweck is the major sort of thinker, I suppose, behind the growth mindset, and she's the professor of psychology at Stanford University. Her book, Mindset, The New Psychology of Success, outlines her argument around the growth mindset, and her website, which is given there, has more information and links to publications around growth mindset and other resources that may be of use to you. So basically, the overview of the growth mindset is that we have understood intelligence to be fixed, like there's a certain number of baked beans in a can of baked beans, but now we understand intelligence is something that can be fostered, that can be expanded, that we can actually exercise, if you like, our brain so that it can grow. We can get smarter over time. So in other words, growth mindset is the idea that your attitude, in other words your mindset, can influence your capacity to learn. If we understand that intelligence can be expanded, the notion of our potential is completely exploded. Another thinker in this area is Guy Claxton, and he's done work around building learning power. It's a framework that some schools choose to adopt. It's been quite popular in England, but there are schools in New Zealand who have adopted it as well. And building learning power centers around this idea of exercising our, quote, learning muscles. In other words, thinking about the brain being like the body, that we can develop it, we can exercise it, and then it can get more powerful and stronger, and if we exercise our learning muscles, then we can develop our lifelong learning skills. So if we accept that intelligence is not a fixed certain number, like the old idea perhaps of the IQ test, if we accept that our mental attitude is just a limit to our ability to learn and to grow, then this actually has some quite significant implications for the classroom, for learners, for teachers, and maybe even for parents. So this slide is just a little bit of an overview of some of the implications that we're going to run through, things that we might want to consider if we're going to adopt a growth mindset approach to teaching and to learning. So the first one is around the kind of language in this that we use to talk about and to talk with our learners, and this is something that really underpins a lot of ideas around growth mindset, because of course if we're thinking about mindset, we're thinking about the internal dialogue that happens within our own minds, within our own heads. So underpinning this is the language that we choose to use. For example, some of the labels you might hear in a staff room. We might talk about somebody as being not very bright, or conversely as being talented, or or as being a real trier, somebody who tries really hard. But also to think about ideas not just in terms of how we talk about our learners, but in fact the language that we use with our learners about the business of the learning that we do within our classrooms. Do we talk about it as schoolwork, homework, the work that we do? Now I want you to work on this, because of course our ideas about work, our connotations, if you like, of work as something that's hard, could be unenjoyable, and something that's quite finite. It's just one thing that you do, and then when you have finished that piece of work, you move on to something else. Whereas if we talk about learning is something that is ongoing. A common metaphor for learning is the idea of learning as a journey, and something that requires persistence and resilience, and that it's something that we continue to work on, rather than being something that's fixed and finite, like the idea of work. So related to this, if you're thinking about work versus learning, this kind of attitude can be seen quite physically on our classroom walls. Do we display work in progress, learning in progress, or do we show the final product? So are we valuing product or are we valuing process? Is it the end result that's important, or is it the learning that happens along the way? Of course, it doesn't have to be either or. Both and can be useful so that we're avoiding those false dichotomies. But it's an interesting concept to think about. What is the purpose of our class displays? Do we want them to look all neat and tidy and beautiful, or do we reflect the idea that learning can be a messy journey and can be messy in its progress? Carol Dweck, in some of her TED Talks, talks about the idea of this not yet, and it's a really powerful statement, because how often do we hear our learners, or actually even ourselves, say, "Oh, I can't do maths, I'm no good at art, I have no creativity," etc., etc. Whereas Carol Dweck suggests that just even that one little powerful three-letter word, yet, suggests that we can improve with effort and persistence. It lifts the lid on that potential. Instead of saying, I can't do long division, I can't do long division yet, suggests that it's something that we can and that we will improve on if we're prepared to continue to persist and put our effort into it. And so again, related to this idea of language is thinking about what the role of praise is. And you know, probably as teachers, we're well aware of the idea of positive reinforcement, but Dweck asks us to think about this in a little bit more depth and think about what it is that we actually praise when we're giving that positive feedback or positive comments to our learners. And she suggests that praising effort, praising persistence, praising resilience is really important, and that's as opposed to praising somebody for being clever or smart or talented, because these are fixed intelligence ideas. Instead, we want to bolster and we want to foster the idea of persistence and working at something to improve ourselves. The effort is what's really important there. And so the role of failure is something that we need to think about within this concept of a growth mindset. We know it doesn't feel good not to be successful or not to succeed at something. And so this is where a positive mental attitude or a growth mindset can have great impact. And that links back to this idea of yet. I haven't succeeded in this yet. Some of you may well be familiar with the idea of FAIL as an acronym, standing for First Attempt in Learning. That we haven't failed at something, we've just figured out a way that it doesn't work yet. And so again, coming back to that idea of learning as a process, learning as a journey, and the idea of learning as being something iterative, and it's something that we continue to put our effort into, to work at in order to improve. Another implication of thinking around the idea of failure and the praise and language is thinking about where grades, we're giving grades, fits into this, and the feedback that we give. Obviously, we know from Hattie's work that feedback is incredibly important and can have a great deal of impact on students' learning. And grades, of course, are something that's quite fixed, it's quite finite, and we're probably aware of our own experiences of turning to the back of an assignment simply to look at the grade and basically failing to take into account or even really engage with or read the comment that the teacher has given us. But if we instead prioritize the feedback, making sure that it's specific, giving one or two next learning steps, praising effort, rather than putting the emphasis on the finite and particular grade, is something that you would consider quite carefully in a growth mindset approach. Perhaps even a little bit more controversially is if you take the notion of growth mindset, that there is no limit to our potential, that we can exercise our learning muscles to get better at something. That may lead us to question ideas around streaming, around gifted and talented education programs, perhaps around special needs, and even the language that we use to talk about that special needs. Perhaps we need to think about inclusive education instead, and indeed that some of the movement is away from that phrase of special needs and towards instead that idea of inclusive education. So do we need these targeted programs, or what are our approaches to these targeted programs to meet the needs of these learners, and how does that fit within a growth mindset approach is something interesting to consider. And perhaps from a little bit more of that leadership perspective, if we're thinking about building our learning muscles, if we're thinking about accepting a growth mindset understanding of intelligence, that has implications for us as teachers, as leaders of learning. And are we role modeling the power of not yet? Do we position ourselves as learners and articulate that to our classes, to our students? Are we comfortable with our own failure and making mistakes within the classroom? So perhaps the broader question here is, how might we adopt a growth mindset approach to our own learning and to perhaps even our own professional learning? So this has been a very brief introduction to growth mindset, and I hope that it's raised some questions and offered some provocations for you to ponder that little bit further.